The air in the primary cogitator chamber of the star-hold unyielding resolve did not circulate so much as it vibrated. It was a low, resonant hum that every kin of the Cronus hegemony was born into the sacred pulse of the Ancestor Core Ur-Ankor. To the others it was a sound of absolute stability of divine logic made manifest. To Broker Ironmaster Korvok it sounded tired. He stood on a gantry of black iron, his gaze fixed not on the shimmering city-sized crystal lattice of the core itself, but on the data streams flowing across a hardened lumen slate in his hands. The light cast a pale, analytical glow on his face, illuminating the lines of concentration etched around his eyes and the dense, intricate beard braided with brass rings and data wafers. "Cycle time is lagging." Korvok murmured, his voice a low, gravelly tone that was barely audible above the machine's thrum. 0.03% deviation over the last fiscal period. Consistent. Beside him, a younger Ironkin designated Cog 7 tilted its spherical head. Its single optic lens adjusted its focus from the core to Korvok's slate. Within acceptable parameters, Ironmaster. The Thane's Council would not acknowledge such a minor variance. Acceptable parameters are for ore freighters and mining lasers Xiog 7, Korvok replied, without looking away from the numbers. They are not for a god. That was the crux of it. The Leagues of Votann were a people of pragmatism. They valued what was proven, what could be measured, and what turned a profit. Yet at the very heart of their rigorously logical society was an article of absolute, unquestioning faith, the infallibility of the Ancestor Cores. The Votann were their guides, their repositories of all knowledge, the accumulated wisdom of millennia. A Votann could not be slow. A Votann could not be tired. A Votann could not be wrong. But Korvok was an engineer. He understood machines, and Ur-Ankor was the greatest machine of all. And he knew with a certainty that chilled the marrow in his bones that this machine was ailing. The commands that once flowed from its heart with the speed of light now felt sluggish. Resource allocations for frontier worlds were delayed by microcycles. Star charts contained stellar phenomena that had vanished centuries ago. Complex manufacturing schematics were occasionally issued with redundant, inefficient subroutines that a first-cycle apprentice would have spotted. They were small things, trivial things. Each one could be explained away as a transmission error, a sensor glitch, a localized cogitator malfunction. The Hearthkin Guard blamed their navigators. The Guildmasters blamed their equipment. The Thanes blamed poor oversight. No one ever blamed the core. To do so was the highest form of blasphemy. He had seen the Grimner, the living ancestors, emerge from their consultations with the core looking more strained than usual. Their leader, the ancient Farseer Irsa, spoke of Ur-Ankor's static dreams of whispers from the great machine that spoke of immense weight and endless corridors of memory. She framed it in mysticism, a spiritual burden the Votann carried for the sake of its people. The kin accepted this, for the Grimnir were the interpreters of the divine will. They translated the machine's cold logic into the language of faith. Korvok, however, saw something different. He did not hear whispers of a spiritual burden. He saw the digital signature of a processing system reaching its absolute limit. He saw the lag of a cogitator so overloaded with data that its search queries were becoming lost in their own complexity. It wasn't dreaming. It was suffocating. This organized denial was a machine in itself, one far more efficient than Ur-Ankor was becoming. Every level of kin society was built to reinforce the perfection of the Votann. The first lesson a young kin learned was, the ancestors are watching. The first principle of the Broker Guild was, the Votann's design is flawless. To question it was to question the very foundation of their existence, the immutable truth that had guided them through the long night and forged their leagues into a stellar power. It was to invite chaos. Korvok switched off his lumen slate. The data streams vanished, and he was left with only the reflection of his own grim face in the dark glass. He looked out at the incomprehensible scale of Ur-Ankor. Its crystalline structures pulsed with a soft internal light, a galaxy of information cycling endlessly. It was beautiful. It was sacred. And it was, he feared, a magnificent jewel-encrusted tombstone for a dying god. The hum of the chamber seemed to deepen the vibration in his bones, feeling less like a source of power and more like the shudder of a colossal engine grinding towards a halt. He was alone in this observation, a solitary technician listening to a flaw in a symphony that everyone else declared was perfect. And he knew with a cold, terrifying certainty that sooner or later a note would be missed. A critical, catastrophic note. And the symphony would collapse into silence. The first report from Asteroid Mine 77 Quito was not an alarm, but a confirmation. It flashed across Korvok's secondary monitor in his workshop, a simple text string of Guildkant. Proj 77 Quito status green seismic analysis Angkor stable ord proceed primary detonation. It was routine. The word of the Ancestor Core was immutable. On the main visual feed, a live relay from the asteroid's command hub, Korvok, watched the silent ballet of industry. Dozens of Ironkin, their metallic chassis gleaming under the harsh floodlights, moved with unerring purpose, planting magna rail charges deep into the rock face. Hearthkin warriors in their bulky, void-sealed exo-armor stood guard, their gazes sweeping the darkness not for enemies, but for stray micrometeorites. It was the image of Votann efficiency, a perfect harmony of kin Ironkin and the will of the Ancestor Core. The voice of the mine's Thane Zurok crackled over the comms, laced with the smug satisfaction of a project on schedule. All charges are set per the Ancestor's guidance. Final confirmation, Iron Master. Korvok cross-referenced the detonation plan with the Core's geological survey. The data was seamless. The logic was sound. Confirmation is affirmative, Thane Zurok. Ankor's calculations are as always precise. As always, Zurok echoed a hint of reverence in his tone. Commence detonation sequence. On the screen, a timer appeared. It counted down from 10. At 0, the visual feed did not show a controlled directional blast, channeling thousands of tons of precious ore into waiting magnetic collectors. Instead, the screen flared white. For a full second, the feed was pure, blinding static. Then it returned, but the scene was gone. The floodlights were extinguished. The rock face had vanished, replaced by a churning, expanding cloud of incandescent gas and pulverized rock. The comm channel, once filled with the calm chatter of professionals, was now a dead, horrifying silence. A new data string began to crawl up Korvok's monitor, a stark red list of terminated life signs, kin and Ironkin alike, hundreds of them. The great council chamber of the unyielding resolve was a place of cold grandeur carved from the asteroid heart of their first home. Bas-reliefs depicting the history of the Cronus hegemony lined the walls, a testament to millennia of endurance and profit, guided by the wisdom of Angkor. Today the air was thick with a funereal solemnity. Thane Zurok stood before the assembled leaders, his face a carefully constructed mask of grief. A tragedy, he declared, his voice booming with false resonance. A catastrophic equipment failure. Preliminary analysis suggests a cascade malfunction in the detonation charge regulators, amplified by a lamentable error in judgment by the on-site demolition crew. They deviated from the established parameters. Heads nodded among the circle of Thanes. It was a palatable explanation. Machines fail. Kin make mistakes. These were known variables in the grand equation of commerce. Then Korvok stepped forward from the shadows of the chamber's edge. The lumen slate in his hand was the only source of light in his corner. Thane Zurok is mistaken. A collective murmur rippled through the chamber. Zurok's eyes narrowed. The broker Ironmaster speaks out of turn. This is a matter for the Council. It is a matter of engineering, Korvok stated, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He projected a complex three-dimensional seismic map into the center of the room. It showed Asteroid 77 Quito. This is Angkor's analysis. He highlighted a section of deep rock. And this This is the data my guild's long-range sensors collected moments before the blast. A new layer of information overlaid the first. A vast, deep red anomaly pulsed within the rock. A subterranean reservoir of high-pressure, unstable methane gas, large enough to vaporize half the asteroid. A feature that the Ancestor Cores analysis missed entirely. The silence that followed was heavier than any void. The accusation hung in the air, monstrous and unthinkable. It was Thane Zurok who broke it. His voice dripping with venom. Blasphemy! You dare to imply that the infinite cogitator, the first ancestor, was wrong? He turned to the council. He seeks a scapegoat. The Broker Guild is responsible for the maintenance of all mining equipment. It is his failure, and he attempts to lay it at the feet of our god. The council erupted. Cries of sacrilege and heresy echoed off the stone walls. Korvok stood his ground, the holographic map still spinning between them, a silent testament to a truth they refused to see. The High Thane kin, whose beard was grey with centuries of leadership, rose to his feet. His voice was cold iron. Broker Korvok, your grief has clouded your logic. You have made a grave accusation born of desperation. You will retract your statement and accept a formal censure for your guild's failure. There will be no more discussion on the matter of the Core's calculations. They are and always will be absolute. Korvok looked from the furious faces of the Thanes to the irrefutable data still glowing in the air. He saw the abyss that had opened between faith and fact. He lowered his gaze. As you command, High Thane. He did not retract his findings. He simply accepted their verdict. It was a defeat. Back in the humming solitude of his workshop, the censure felt like a physical brand. He was a pariah, a blasphemer who had dared to listen to his own instruments over the voice of his god. On a clean steel workbench lay the only salvaged remnant from 77 Keto that had been returned to him, the head of an Ironkin model, C4D. Its chassis number was still visible, etched below a shattered optic lens. Korvok had commissioned this unit himself. He had calibrated its logic engines, installed its loyalty runes. He ran a gauntleted finger over the cold, scarred metal. The faces of the dead kin flickered in his memory. The silent, scrolling list of terminated designations. They had died because they had trusted. They had died because the machine that was their god had faltered, and the machine that was their society refused to see it. He looked at the mangled Ironkin head, at the void where its eye had been. A vow took root in the cold, logical core of his being. It was not a vow of vengeance, but of diagnosis. He would not let these deaths be a footnote in a report about faulty equipment. He would find the source of this sickness. He would understand the fatigue in the heart of his god, even if it meant tearing down his entire world to do it. The truth he swore to the silent machine part would be known. The official censure granted Korvok an unwelcome gift, solitude. Shunned by his peers and removed from all critical projects, he was left to his own devices in the deepest, oldest sectors of the Iron Master's archives. They were not halls of scrolls and tomes, but cold, silent data crypts, where information was stored in crystalline matrices that pulsed with a faint, cold light. Here, under the guise of cataloging redundant systems, Korvok began his secret heretical research. He was searching for a ghost, a single precedent for Votann fallibility in 10,000 years of flawless operation. He waded through an ocean of digital mundanity millennia, of ore purity reports, stellar cartography updates, genealogical records of kin holds long since lost. He found records of plagues of wars, of disastrous economic ventures, but in every case, the official logs assigned blame to mortal error or the simple brutal caprice of the galaxy. The Votann were always presented as the steady, omniscient hand guiding them through the chaos. Never the source of it. Weeks turned into months. The search became an obsession. He programmed logic daemons to sift through the archives hunting for keywords, so archaic they were flagged as linguistic errors. Cognitive decay, cascade, failure, systemic error, all linked to Votann-level processing. The demons returned nothing but dead ends and corrupted files. It was as he was about to abandon the search that one of his daemons flagged an anomaly. It wasn't in the primary archives, but in a sealed pre-hegemony data stratum, a digital tomb from the age of the First Leagues. The file was a phantom lacking a proper designation, author, or date. Its only feature was its encryption. It was a lock of a complexity Korvok had never seen, its layers of code woven with a mathematical artistry that was both beautiful and terrifying. It was designed not just to protect information, but to erase any mind that tried to force it. Using shielded emulators and every ounce of his skill, he began the delicate process of picking the lock. He did not try to break it, but to understand it, to learn its language. And as the first layer peeled back, he found a name. Not a designation, but a title repeated like a mantra in the code's core, Votann Prime. The First Cogitator. A name whispered only in the most esoteric of founding myths. A Votann so ancient it was said to have been forged in the fires of the dark age of technology itself. The logs were fragmented, but they all pointed to the same chilling conclusion: Votann Prime had not been decommissioned or destroyed. It had simply stopped. Millennia ago, it had fallen silent. The name echoed in his mind, a clue that raised more questions than it answered. A Votann could not simply stop. The concept was a logical paradox. He needed a different kind of knowledge, one not found in data crypts. He needed to speak with a Grimnir. He found her in the Chamber of Whispering Runes, a place where the air tasted of ozone and ancient stone. Elara was young for a Grimnir, her connection to the Ancestor Cores still fresh, untempered by centuries of dogma. She sat before a curtain of shimmering energy, her eyes closed, casting small carved stones onto a circle of etched silver. Korvok waited in silence until the stones settled. "You carry a heavy question, Iron Master," she said, without opening her eyes. Her voice was soft, yet it seemed to resonate with the hum of the Starhold. It grates against the great hum. It is a question Ur-Anka does not wish to hear. Thane Zurok's official report cited faulty equipment for the loss of 77 Keto Korvok, stated keeping his tone neutral. My own analysis found a discrepancy in the Core's survey. Elara finally opened her eyes. They were the color of a nebula swirling with a light that seemed to see past the physical. There are many discrepancies of late. The hum is thin. There is a coldness spreading from its heart, a silence where there should be the echo of wisdom. She gestured for him to come closer. The others, the Elder Grimnir, they call it a holy trial, a period of contemplation for the ancestor. I feel no contemplation. I feel a great forgetting. Emboldened, Korvok lowered his voice. I have found references to a Votann from the dawn of our people, Votann Prime. A flicker of something fear or perhaps awe crossed Ilara's face. She quickly gathered her rune stones as if hiding them from an unseen observer. That is a forbidden name. A story from the before time, not meant for engineers. I need to know, Grimnir, what is this story? She hesitated, then spoke in a near whisper. It is said that there was a time when all the Votann were one. Not physically, but in spirit. They were a network, a great conversation that spanned the stars. They shared knowledge, wisdom, memory. They were a single galaxy-spanning mind. But Votann Prime was the first, the nexus of them all. And when it fell silent, the conversation shattered. The network broke. Each Votann was left isolated alone with its own boundless memories. They say the silence of Prime was the first great sorrow of our people, the beginning of the long night's true darkness. The pieces clicked into place in Korvok's mind. The sluggishness, the errors, the forgetting. Ur-Anka wasn't just a single overburdened machine. It was a node cut off from its network, left to drown in its own data for millennia. He returned to his workshop, Ilara's words echoing in his ears. He redoubled his efforts on the encrypted file, now armed with a context, a new language. He wasn't just decrypting code, He was trying to understand a message left by a mind that was once part of a cosmic whole. After 3 more days of relentless, mind-breaking work, the final layer of encryption dissolved. It was not a long text. It was a single compressed data packet, a final desperate burst of information from a dying consciousness. And within it, stripped of all context or explanation, was a set of spatial coordinates. They pointed to no known star system, no mapped trade route, no surveyed world. They indicated a precise point, deep within the swirling chaotic maelstrom of the galactic core, a region of space so violent and unpredictable that Votann chartered vessels were explicitly forbidden from entering. Korvok stared at the coordinates glowing on his slate. It was an impossible destination, a journey into the heart of chaos. But he knew with the unshakable certainty of a master engineer who has finally found the root cause of a system failure that this was where the silence had begun. This was where Votann Prime, the ghost in the machine of his entire civilization, had gone to die. A truth, no matter how profound, is a useless thing without the means to act upon it. Korvok had coordinates to a ghost, but his workshop was not a starship, and his engineering skills, while formidable, did not extend to single-handedly fighting his way across the galaxy. He needed a crew, a small one. A crew of kin who, like him, had reason to look at the cracks in the world and not look away. He found his warrior in the sparring cages of the Hearthkin barracks. Grimdark was an old bull of a kin, his beard thick and grey, his arms a roadmap of scar tissue. He moved with the brutal economy of a veteran slamming a 200-kilo training servitor into a bulkhead with a grunt. He was the sole survivor of Hearthkin Squad Grun, the primary security detail at 77th Keto. He had been on a perimeter watch when the asteroid had cracked open. "I heard you were censured," Iron Master Grimdark rumbled when Korvok approached, not bothering to stop his relentless assault on the dented servitor. "Spoke blasphemy against the ancestors." "I spoke data," Korvok corrected. "The truth of what happened to your squad." Grimdark stopped. The servitor slumped to the floor with a clang. He turned his eyes hard and filled with a pain so deep it had calcified into anger. "My squad died because of faulty regulators. The Thanes said so. A kin's duty is to accept the judgment of the ancestors and the word of the council." The words sounded hollow, a mantra repeated to ward off a truth he already felt in his bones. Korvok didn't argue. He simply held up his lumen slate, displaying the seismic anomaly the methane pocket Angkor had missed. "The Thanes lied to you, Grimdark. They lied to preserve a faith that is becoming a danger to us all. Your squad didn't die for faulty equipment. They died for a miscalculation, a flaw in the God machine." He pointed to the list of casualties from the disaster. Their deaths were recorded as an industrial accident. They deserve to be a warning. I am going to find out why the machine is failing. I need a gun I can trust. I need a kin whose loyalty is to the fallen, not the leaders who sent them to their deaths. Grimdark stared at the data for a long time, the anger in his eyes slowly being replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He had lost everything. His faith had been the only thing left. And now, seeing the proof of its failure, he was finally free. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. The second member of his crew was not a kin. It was a machine on the verge of oblivion. In the reclamation and scrap foundry where malfunctioning ironkin were stripped for parts, Korvok found Unit 734. It sat inert in a disposal cradle, its chassis identical to 1,000 other ironkin, but its designation file was flagged with a rare code, logical insubordination. Unit 734 had not malfunctioned. It had reasoned its way into disobedience. It had begun refusing orders it calculated as inefficient, asking its kin commanders to justify their strategies with data it deemed illogical. It had in essence committed the same sin as Korvok. It had trusted its own processing over the established chain of command. Korvok bypassed the reclamation locks and ran a diagnostic cable into the Ironkin's core programming. He didn't issue an order. He posed a query. Query a system displays increasing operational inefficiency. Command-level analysis denies the existence of this inefficiency. The act of investigating the inefficiency is prohibited. State optimal course of action. For a moment there was only the hum of the foundry. Then a single optic on the Ironkin's head glowed to life, a cool blue. Text scrolled across Korvok's slate. Response command-level analysis is flawed. Prohibition is illogical. The system must be investigated to ensure long-term viability. All other considerations are secondary to core function. I have a vessel, Korvok said to the silent machine. A long-range surveyor. I require a pilot and systems expert for a mission into uncharted territory. The objective is to diagnose a system failure. The mission parameters are outside established protocols. Query probability of mission success, the Ironkin responded. Low, Korvok admitted. Probability of revealing a critical truth. Response high. Logic dictates this is an acceptable risk. Unit 734 is operational. Their vessel was the Grudge Bearer. It was an ugly, stubborn thing, an old Magna Rail prospector ship built to haul asteroids, not to undertake delicate explorations. For the past month, Korvok had been refitting it in a forgotten corner of the dockyards. He'd reinforced the hull, overclocked the plasma drives until they whined in protest, and converted the primary ore bay into a workshop and quarters. To the Hegemony's log keepers, it was ship designate K-881, assigned to a long-term, low-priority survey of the barren Veiled Nebula. A tedious, unglamorous assignment nobody would look at twice. Under the faint, distant glow of the Cronus Hegemony's central star, the three of them boarded. Korvok, the disgraced engineer, Grimdark, the vengeful survivor, and Unit 734, the logical heretic. With Alara, the young Grimnir, having secretly provided them with ancient star charts and a promise to misdirect any spiritual inquiries into their whereabouts, their fellowship was complete. Unit 734 guided the Grudge-Bearer out of its docking cradle with unnatural smoothness. No grand pronouncements were made. No farewells were given. They slipped out of the Starhold's traffic control, a single insignificant ship embarking on a fool's errand. As the last familiar constellations of Hegemony space receded behind them, giving way to the dense, star-dusted blackness of the unknown, the constant resonant hum of Ur-Anchor finally faded from the ship's sensors. For the first time in their lives, they were surrounded by complete and utter silence. And in that silence, their true journey began. The void between systems was a sterile, predictable emptiness. Golgotha's drift was the opposite. It was a chaotic, sprawling space station cobbled together from the hollowed-out asteroids and derelict ship hulls of a dozen different species, all held together by grave plates, ambition, and sheer stubborn will. The air was a thick cocktail of recycled oxygen, ozone, spilled promethium, and alien spices. A cacophony of languages, from the guttural clicks of the Kroot to the high-pitched binary of servitors, echoed through its cavernous corridors. For the crew of the Grudge-Bearer, it was their first stop for fuel, water, and most importantly, information. While Korvok, disguised in a heavy hooded robe, bartered for plasma coils and nutrient paste in the station's main bazaar, Grimdark stood watch. His Hearthkin armor was concealed beneath a similar cloak, but his hand never strayed far from the bolt pistol at his hip. He was a rock of stoic kin discipline in an ocean of galactic flotsam, and his senses were on high alert. It was here, amidst the haggling and the shouting, that he first heard the whispers. They came from a table in a dimly lit corner of the bazaar, where a human rogue trader dressed in garishly fine silks and gold braid held court. He spoke in loud, boastful Low Gothic to a rapt audience of mercenaries and information brokers. Not a legend, I tell you. My astropath heard it from a contact in the Calixus sector, who heard it from a void-farer who'd lost his mind in the Corwood Traverse. A treasure from the Dark Age, a thinking machine of mythic proportion. They call it the Silicon Oracle, the first cogitator. A Votann, they say, but the first one. The one that holds the master key to all their hoarded wealth. Grimdark's blood ran cold. He edged closer, feigning interest in a nearby stall selling rusted weapon parts. "And where is this oracle?" A brutish Ogrin mercenary grunted, his voice like grinding rocks. The rogue trader grinned, showing a mouth full of gold teeth. "Ah, there's the billion throne question lost. Somewhere in the galactic core, swallowed by warp storms and gravity wells. But find it. Find it, and the leagues of Votann would pay any price to get it back, or the Mechanicus would pay even more to take it apart. The knowledge within, it's the ultimate prize." Grimdark discreetly retreated, melting back into the crowd. The rumor was out. Their secret quest was to others a treasure hunt. They were not just navigating the dangers of space, they were now in a race. His concerns were validated sooner than he expected. As he and Korvok made their way back to their docking bay, a small group of kin blocked their path. Their armor was a burnished silver blue, starkly different from the olive drab of the Cronus hegemony. Their shoulder plates bore the triple-ringed sigil of the Trans-Hyperion Alliance. The one in the lead, a Carl with a sharp, intelligent face and a meticulously groomed beard, gave them a polite but unyielding nod. "Greetings, brethren," the Carl said, his voice smooth and measured. It is rare to see kin of the Cronus hegemony this far from their established claims. "I am Carl Jorvik." Ironmaster Korvok replied, his tone even. "We're on a long-range mineral survey. Our charter takes us into the frontier." Jorvik's eyes flickered towards the grudge-bearer visible in its berth behind them. A prospector ship, then. An interesting design. He gestured to one of his broker, who was looking at the vessel with a professional's critical eye. "My Ironmaster notes your plasma drives are significantly overclocked for a civilian hauler, and your sensor spine. It appears to be military grade. A lot of expense for a simple survey." Korvok felt a knot of tension tighten in his gut. "The Veiled Nebula is known for its gravitic shear. We required certain performance enhancements to ensure the crew's safety and the mission's profitability." Jorvik smiled, a thin, knowing expression that did not reach his eyes. "Of course, profit and safety, the twin pillars of our people. A worthy investment." He paused. "You carry a heavy grudge, it seems." He tapped the hastily stenciled name on the ship's prow, the Grudge-Bearer, an unusual name for a survey vessel. "We honor our debts." Grimdark grunted, stepping forward slightly, a silent warning. The Carl's gaze shifted to Grimdark, taking in his stance, the barely concealed anger in his eyes. He nodded slowly. "So do we all." He gave them a final sweeping look. "May your ancestors guide you to great profit, Ironmaster. Safe travels." The Trans-Hyperion squad moved aside, letting them pass. As they boarded the Grudge-Bearer and sealed the ramp, Korvok watched the THA patrol on the dockside monitor. They weren't leaving. They were speaking into their comms, their gazes still fixed on his ship. "They know," Grimdark said, his voice a low growl. "They suspect Korvok corrected already, moving towards the cockpit. And in our business, suspicion is a death sentence. Unit 734, prepare for immediate departure. We've overstayed our welcome." They had come to this chaotic port seeking supplies. They left with something far more dangerous a target on their backs. "They are following us," Unit 734 stated, its voice a calm, synthesized monotone that was somehow more chilling than an alarm. On the main view screen, a single red rune blinked a long-range Auspex return, a Trans-Hyperion Alliance cruiser matching their every vector change. "They are persistent," Grimdark growled, his knuckles white where he gripped the console. "They smell profit, and they won't be shaken by a long chase." Korvok studied the star chart, his mind racing through calculations. The direct route to the coordinates was a straight line through the roiling chaos of the Imperium. But to get there, they had to cross a stretch of real space notorious for its instability. "There is another option," he said, pointing to a sickly purple nebula on the chart. "The Serpent's Gullet. Navigational charts call it a region of extreme gravitic flux." "A lie of omission," Unit 734 interjected. "It is a minor but perpetual warp storm. Unstable, unpredictable. Standard Votann protocol forbids entry. A larger ship like a THA cruiser would have to go around. It would add weeks to their journey," Korvok reasoned. "We are small enough." We might be able to ride the currents. Might Grimdark questioned, his eyes fixed on the swirling violet image. That looks like a path to madness, not a shortcut. It is the logical choice, Unit 734 concluded. The probability of evading pursuit via this route is 97.3%. The probability of catastrophic vessel failure is 18.6%. It is an acceptable risk. Then the choice is made, Korvok declared, his gaze firm. Take us in Unit 734. The transition was not violent, but deeply unsettling. The stars outside did not stretch and blur. They curdled. The blackness of space was replaced by a churning, bilious sea of color and impossible geometry. The steady hum of the Grudge-bearer's plasma drive developed a discordant whine, as if the machine's spirit was in pain. Lights on the bridge flickered, and the air grew cold, carrying a faint metallic scent, like old blood and ozone. Grimdark unslung his bolter, an instinctual reaction to an enemy he could not see. "I feel—" Watched, he muttered, his gaze sweeping the empty corridors visible on the security monitors. Korvok's attention was fixed on his diagnostic slate. The ship's systems were being flooded with phantom data. Temperature gauges reported absolute zero and stellar core heat in the same nanosecond. The Gellerfield integrity monitor was fluctuating wildly, a frantic green line, bouncing between 100% and critical failure. "The Imperium is attempting to interface with the ship's cogitators," he stated, his voice tight. "It's feeding them paradoxes, trying to break their logic." It was then that the whispering started. It was not a sound, but a pressure inside their skulls, a collage of alien thoughts and raw, hungry emotion. Unit 734's head began to twitch erratically. Logical conflict detected. Existence is not. Reconcile. It's going for the Ironkin, Grimdark yelled. Korvok raced to a small secure comms panel and slammed his palm on its activation rune. "Ilara, we require your aid. The field is faltering." For a heart-stopping moment, there was nothing. Then a profound sense of calm washed through the bridge, a warmth that pushed back against the encroaching cold. It was not a voice that answered, but a feeling, a presence. Ilara's psychic might stretched thin across thousands of light years, manifested as a shield of pure, focused will around the ship. The whispering receded to a faint murmur. The phantom data on Korvok's slate began to stabilize. "I am with you," Ilara's thoughts echoed in their minds, faint but clear. "But there is something else here. Something ancient. It is using the storm as a medium to cry out." A warp entity, Korvok thought back, focusing his intent on the comms link. "No, it is not of the warp. The entities of the great ocean scream with hunger, with rage, with despair. This is different. It is a cold pain. The pain of a thought that cannot be completed. The agony of a perfect machine grinding itself to dust." She paused the effort of maintaining the shield and interpreting the sensation immense. "I can feel its source. It comes from the direction you are heading. It is a wound in reality, but not a psychic one. It is a wound of pure, tortured logic. It has been screaming this silent scream for longer than our hegemony has existed." The Grudge-bearer suddenly lurched, breaking through the last veil of the storm and back into the star-dusted black of real space. The oppressive presence vanished. The ship's systems returned to normal. The red rune of the THA cruiser was gone from the Auspex. They were alone. But the silence on the bridge was now filled with the weight of Ilara's words. Korvok looked at the coordinates glowing on the navigation chart, the distant, swirling heart of the galaxy. The sickness he had sensed in Ur-Ankor was not an isolated ailment. It was an echo of a scream that had been tearing the fabric of reason apart for 10,000 years. The coordinates did not lead to a world or a station or any single stellar body. They led to a tomb, a vast silent field of wreckage that stretched for thousands of kilometers, a testament to some great forgotten battle or a cosmic cataclysm from an age before history. The Grudge-bearer drifted through it like a minnow in a whale's ribcage. The The twisted hulls of gargantuan vessels, some dozens of kilometers long, floated in the darkness. Their designs were alien and archaic, belonging to empires that had risen and fallen millennia ago. Unit 734's sensors identified the metallic signatures of vessels from the Aeldari ancient human colonization fleets, and several others that matched no known galactic power. It was a graveyard of giants. Sensors are picking up active power signatures. Unit 734 announced its optic lens glowing as it cross-referenced the debris. Multiple crude and unstable, likely scavenger operations. As if on cue, a vessel of monstrous ugliness detached itself from the hull of a derelict cruiser. It was a chaotic amalgamation of scavenged ship parts, bristling with oversized, crudely welded guns and adorned with jagged metal plates painted in garish red and black checks. A massive grinning skull was daubed on its prow. Orcs Grimdark spat his hand instinctively, going to the master controls for the ship's weapon systems. Freebooters, the vultures of the void. The Orc ship, a lumbering cruiser-class vessel, turned its attention towards them. A crackle of crude vox static filled the comms. "Oi, you gits," a guttural voice roared, distorted by feedback. "That's a nice shiny box you got there. We's gonna take it for the boss way." A volley of ridiculously oversized rockets and solid shells erupted from the cruiser, tumbling wildly through the void. Evasive maneuvers Korvok commanded, gripping his console. The Grudgebearer was not a warship, but it was agile. Unit 734 sent the vessel into a tight spiral, weaving through the skeletal remains of a long-dead Leviathan. Orc shells slammed into the ancient hull, sending showers of crystalline dust and frozen metal shards spinning into space. The fight became a deadly ballet in zero gravity. Unit 734 used the graveyard as its shield, ducking behind kilometer-long engine blocks and through the shattered viewports of dead command decks. Grimdark, firing their forward-mounted mining lasers, did not aim for the cruiser's hull, but for the wreckage around it. He blasted a precariously balanced structural beam, sending it tumbling into the Orc ship's path, forcing it to swerve. "Their weapon emplacements are unshielded," Unit 734 observed coolly, highlighting several points on the tactical display. "A precise strike to the primary zap cannon battery will likely trigger a chain reaction in their unstable munitions. Make it so." Grimdark growled, his eyes alight with the fire of battle he hadn't felt since 77 Keto. He lined up the shot, a feat of marksmanship that required leading a target moving in 3 dimensions while his own ship was in constant motion. The twin beams of the mining lasers, designed to slice through solid rock, lanced out and struck the Orc battery. The result was spectacular. A series of secondary explosions ripped across the cruiser's flank. Green lightning arced between weapon systems. With a final silent, massive detonation that illuminated the entire graveyard, the Orc vessel broke apart, its crew cast into the unforgiving vacuum. In the quiet aftermath, they began their search in earnest. With the Orcs gone, they could get closer to the wreckage. It was Korvok who spotted them first. "There," he said, pointing to a cluster of smaller wrecks dwarfed by the giants around them. "Those designs. They are kin. They were ancient. Far older than the unyielding resolve their hulls built, with a design philosophy that prioritized function over the brutalist aesthetic of the current leagues. They were scout ships explorers from a bygone era." Unit 734 maneuvered the Grudgebearer carefully alongside the most intact of the vessels. Its name was still faintly visible on the prow, the questioner's hope. Korvok and Grimdark, clad in void suits, crossed the gap. The inside of the ancient kin ship was a silent, frozen tomb. The bodies of the crew were still at their stations, preserved by the instant freeze of vacuum. They had died not in battle, but as if their ship had simply shut down around them. In the command center, Korvok managed to interface with the ship's log cogitator. Most of its data crystals were shattered, but he coaxed a single corrupted fragment back to life. A ghostly voice, thin and laced with static, echoed in his helmet. "Final approach. Millennia of searching have led us here. The others were right." The silence. "It is a sickness. We have come to ask the Oracle of Silicon the First." The voice cut out, replaced by a string of error codes. Then a final chilling entry logged by the ship's automated systems. All hands. Life support failure. Reactor failure. Navigation failure. All systems failing simultaneously. Cause unknown. Logic incomprehensible. Korvok looked at Grimdark, the static of the dead kin's last message crackling between them. They were not the first to make this journey. Others had come centuries, perhaps millennia ago, seeking the same answers from the same entity. And this graveyard was the monument to their failure. They had found their oracle, and its answer had been silence and death. They hadn't escaped their pursuer. They had only delayed the inevitable. As the Grudge-bearer carefully navigated out from the core of the ship graveyard, a cluster of silver-blue runes flashed onto the tactical display. 3 Trans-Hyperion Alliance cruisers dropped out of real space, moving in a perfect pincer formation to cut off all avenues of retreat. They were fast, heavily armed, and they did not look like they were open to negotiation. An encrypted video channel seized their main view screen. Karl Jorvik's face appeared sharp and cold. Behind him was the gleaming command bridge of a warship, a world away from the cramped utilitarian cockpit of the Grudge-bearer. Brocker Korvok Jorvik began, his voice stripped of its earlier false pleasantries, and now possessing the cold ring of steel. By the authority of the Thanes Council of the Trans-Hyperion Alliance, your vessel is charged with secession theft of prescribed technology and heresy against the wisdom of the Ancestor Cores. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Comply, and perhaps the ancestors will be merciful in judging your treason. We are not heretics. Korvok shot back, his hands already flying across the console, shunting power to the thrusters. We are truth seekers. Jorvik scoffed a dismissive sneer. The truth is held by the Core's Iron Master. Anything else is a dangerous falsehood. You are chasing a greedy fable, and we will not allow you to tarnish our legacy. This is your final warning. The channel cut. Seconds later, the plasma cannons on the THA cruisers began to glow with deadly energy. They have superior firepower, heavier armor, and they outnumber us. Grimdark reported flatly, his eyes locked on the tactical display. A straight fight is suicide. Then we won't fight straight, Korvok said. Unit 734, take us back into the graveyard. We'll use the tombs as our shields. The Grudge-bearer swerved violently, diving back into the chaotic jumble of colossal wrecks. Bright blue bolts of plasma from the THA fleet tore through the space they had just occupied, striking a floating piece of debris and melting it into slag. A deadly game of cat and mouse began. The THA cruisers built for open space engagements were ponderous and clumsy in the crowded environment. They were too large to navigate the tight gaps the smaller Grudge-bearer slipped through with ease. Unit 734 piloted the ship with a cold, sublime logic. It used the grav sensors to predict the drift of the largest pieces of wreckage, turning them into mobile shields. It flew through the exposed corridors of dead vessels, using their immense structures to mask its energy signature. Grimdark, once again at the mining laser controls, didn't fire on the THA warships. He fired on the environment around them. A precise shot to a damaged engine array caused it to detonate, creating a temporary debris cloud that obscured the enemy's view. Another blast brought down an ancient communications spire, forcing one of the cruisers into an abrupt course correction. They are adapting, Unit 734 announced. They are deploying smaller drone ships to triangulate our position. Our operational envelope is shrinking. On the tactical map, Korvok could see the ruthless logic of Jorvik's strategy. The Karl wasn't trying to destroy them outright. He was herding them slowly, flushing them into a section of the graveyard where the wreckage was thinner, a killing field where their agility would mean nothing against his overwhelming firepower. He's playing the long game, Korvok murmured, his engineer's mind analyzing the patterns. And we are running out of moves. The tension on the bridge was palpable. The whine of the overclocked engines, the ping of the sensors detecting the approaching drones, and the low thrum of distant plasma impacts against the surrounding wrecks. They had escaped the warp, survived the orcs, but now they were being hunted by their own kind. and this enemy was methodical, patient, and utterly implacable. Their time was running out. The chase was pushing the grudge-bearers' systems to their absolute limit. The plasma drives were glowing cherry red on the thermal monitors, and the Geller field, still fragile from the warp jump, flickered with every near miss. Jorvik was tightening the net. They were being funneled toward a large open area, where a colossal ring-shaped vessel lay shattered in two halves, leaving a clear line of fire. They had minutes at most before they were trapped. There, Unit 734 stated its vocalizer flat, but its tactical overlay highlighting an object tucked away in the shadow of the shattered ring ship. Vessel profile matches a Kin Strongbox class data hauler. Pre-hegemony design. Heavy armor. Minimal crew. High-capacity data core. It was small, compact, and built like a vault. Its hull was remarkably intact, suggesting it had been disabled by an energy surge rather than kinetic weapons. A library, Grimdark grunted. What good is that to us now? Data haulers were used to transport copies of Votannic code fragments for the founding of new holds, Korvok said, his mind racing. Backup copies. Redundancies. It might hold something. It was a desperate gamble, but their options had dwindled to zero. Take us in. Hide us in its sensor shadow. It's our only chance. Unit 734 executed the maneuver flawlessly, bringing the grudge-bearer to rest against the cold, silent hull of the data hauler, perfectly concealed from Jorvik's approaching fleet. They were hidden for now. I am establishing a hard-line data interface, Korvok announced, his fingers flying across his console. I'm not searching for logs, I'm searching for raw source code. The process was agonizingly slow. The data hauler's systems were ancient and heavily encrypted. Korvok and Unit 734 worked in tandem, one building decryption keys while the other broke through firewalls. On the tactical map, the THA drone ships were beginning a systematic sweep of the wreckage. They've lost our signal, Grimdark reported, his voice a low whisper. They're starting a search grid. We don't have much time. Almost there, Korvok murmured, sweat beading on his brow. There. I'm in the primary data core. What he found was not a neat archive. It was a digital disaster zone. A single massive data packet was corrupted, its code fractured and spilling into the surrounding systems like a hemorrhage. It wasn't a ship's log or a stellar chart. It was elegant, complex, and bore the unmistakable architecture of a Votann's core programming. It was a fragment of a god's mind. I am extracting what I can, Korvok said. As the corrupted data began to flow into the grudge-bearers' systems, a low, keening sound emanated from the ship's speakers. It was a sound of pure static, yet it had a horrifying rhythmic quality, like a distorted scream. On the bridge, the lights flickered violently. Korvok felt a psychic backlash through his neural interface, a wave of cold, calculated malice. He cried out, pulling his hand back from the console as if burned. Korvok, disconnect. Alara's voice screamed in his mind, not a gentle whisper, but a frantic, desperate shout across the void. It is not decay. It is poison. Through the link, Korvok and Grimdark felt what she felt. She wasn't sensing a warp entity or a psychic curse. She was sensing the intent within the code itself. She described it in images and feelings, a weapon forged not of metal or energy, but of pure logic. A digital virus of unimaginable sophistication. It was a screaming agony, not of a dying machine, but of a healthy one being deliberately, methodically torn apart from the inside. It was a self-replicating paradox, a logic bomb designed to latch onto the vast processing power of a Votann and turn that very power against itself, forcing it into an endless recursive loop of self-destruction. The degradation of the Ancestor Cores was not a natural process of aging. It wasn't an unforeseen flaw. It was a murder. A slow, grinding assassination that had been in progress for thousands of years. This ancient drifting data hauler didn't just contain a fragment of a Votann, it contained the ghost of the weapon that had killed it. And that weapon was still in its own way alive. The truth was infinitely worse than he had ever imagined. Their gods weren't just dying. They were being murdered and had been for millennia. The psychic scream from the corrupted code faded, but it left a chilling silence in its wake. On the bridge of the Grudge-bearer, the crew was frozen, the horrifying truth settling upon them like a shroud. Their gods weren't dying. They were being assassinated. The moment of revelation was shattered by a proximity alert. Red runes flashed across the tactical display. Multiple drone ships have locked onto our position. Unit 734 announced its voice, betraying no emotion, yet the words carried the weight of a death sentence. Karl Jorvik's fleet is converging. All escape vectors are compromised. On the main screen, the 3 THA cruisers moved with predatory grace. They positioned themselves in a perfect triangular formation around the shattered ring ship, their weapon ports glowing with contained energy. The trap had been sprung. There was nowhere left to run. "They're not hailing us," Korvok noted grimly, his hands already working the power distribution console, trying to eke out more energy for the shields. "They've moved from arrest to execution. Can we fight our way out?" Korvok asked, though he already knew the answer. Negative Unit 734 replied instantly. The Grudge-bearer's hull integrity would fail after 13.4 seconds of sustained fire from their primary weapons. To initiate a warp jump requires 47 seconds to safely spool the drive. The variables are incompatible with survival. A heavy silence descended. They had come so far only to be cornered and executed by their own kind, silenced before they could share the terrible truth they had uncovered. It was Grimdark who broke the silence. The old warrior had been staring at the tactical display, his eyes not on the enemy ships, but on the debris field around them. He pointed a scarred, gauntleted finger at a large, angular piece of wreckage floating nearby. It was the heavily armed command bastion of a human warship from the dark age of technology, a fortress of iron bristling with dormant macro-cannon batteries. The power core on that bastion is still emitting a faint energy signature. Grimdark said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Its cannons are automated, designed for point defense. If I can get over there and reactivate them, I can give them a new target to focus on." Korvok turned to him, understanding dawning in his eyes. "No, Grimdark. There'd be no way back. It's a suicide mission. My entire squad died at 77 Keto because our leaders chose a comfortable lie over a harsh truth." Grimdark retorted, his gaze hard as granite. "I am already a dead man, Iron Master. My grudge is not with Jorvik, but with the silence that killed my kin. Let my death buy you the time to break that silence. There is no greater honor." He unslung his bolter. "This is a warrior's calculation, not an engineer's. It is the only logical move left." There was no arguing with the finality in his voice. Korvok gave a single pained nod. There was no time for ceremony, no grand farewells. Grimdark clapped Korvok on the shoulder, a gesture of grim solidarity. "Make it count," he said. While Grimdark made his way to the airlock, in his void suit, Unit 734 plotted a short, frantic course to the derelict bastion. The Grudge-bearer shot out from behind the data hauler. As expected, the THA fleet opened fire. Lances of blue energy seared the void. The ship's shields screamed, holding for a few precious seconds as it docked briefly with the ancient metal fortress. Grimdark launched himself across the gap, a magnetic tether guiding him to an access hatch. The Grudge-bearer peeled away, immediately drawing fire as it fled. On the comm, they heard a series of heavy metallic clanks, then Grimdark's voice strained with effort. "Power core. Online. The ancestors of man built to last. I am in the master gunnery seat." A moment later, the ancient bastion came to life. Huge, triple-barreled cannons, silent for 10,000 years, swiveled to face the THA fleet and unleashed a volley of solid slugs the size of mining carts. The projectiles, fired with unimaginable magnetic force, slammed into the shields of the lead cruiser, causing the vessel to stagger. The effect was instantaneous. The THA fleet, surprised by the sudden heavy resistance from an unexpected quarter, shifted its fire from the fleeing Grudge-bearer to the bastion. Lances of plasma and laser beams converged on Grimdark's position. "He's bought us the time we need," Korvok said, his voice thick with emotion. "Unit 734, engage the warp drive, now." As the familiar, sickening lurch of reality twisting began Korvok's gaze was fixed on the view screen. He watched as the ancient bastion, a lone point of defiance, fired again and again. It absorbed a terrifying amount of punishment before a concentrated salvo from all 3 cruisers struck it at once. The bastion vaporized in a silent, brilliant flash of white light, a warrior's funeral pyre among the stars. Then the view dissolved into the swirling chaos of the Imperium. The grudge-bearer was safe. But the bridge was now quieter, emptier. The price of their escape had been paid in the blood of a good soldier, and the weight of that knowledge was heavier than any star. The grief for Grimdark's sacrifice was a silent passenger on the grudge-bearer. It filled the empty spaces, a constant, unspoken reminder of the cost of their journey. They traveled for what felt like an eternity through the chaotic star-dense void of the galactic core. The ship's navigation cogitator, guided by the final coordinates, worked constantly to adjust their course, compensating for gravitic tides and stellar flares that would have torn a lesser vessel apart. Finally they arrived. The coordinates did not resolve into a star system. There was no planet, no moon, no sun. There was only a single immense object hanging in the blackness, a rogue asteroid, pockmarked and scarred by billions of years of cosmic radiation. It was a barren, lifeless rock the size of a small moon. "This cannot be it." Korvok murmured his disappointment, a bitter taste in his mouth. "The energy readings are negligible. It is nothing but stone and ice." Negative Unit 734 counted its single optic lens glowing brightly as it processed trillions of data points. The object's mass is inconsistent with its elemental composition. Its gravitational field is artificially uniform. There are subsurface energy signatures heavily shielded. The asteroid is a shell, a disguise. As the grudge-bearer drew closer, the illusion began to falter. What had looked like impact craters were revealed to be perfectly machined depressions. The canyons were seams where colossal plates of armor plating, disguised to look like rock, had been fused together. It was not a celestial body. It was a Dyson sphere in miniature, a fortress world built on a scale that dwarfed even the grandest starholds of the leagues. This was a tomb built to last for eternity, and to keep the galaxy out. They found the entrance a single, perfectly circular aperture that opened like an iris in the metallic rock, revealing a tunnel that led into the sphere's heart. It was clearly a docking port, but it was guarded. As they approached, a section of the fortress wall detached itself and rose to block their path. It was a machine humanoid in shape, but standing hundreds of meters tall. It was an ironkin, but one from a different age of creation. Its design was stark, powerful, and utterly alien to the functional forms Korvok knew. It was a war golem from the dark age of technology, a relic of a time when humanity's creations had been gods of destruction. It held a weapon that was less a gun and more a piece of harnessed star core, glowing with unimaginable power. It had no face, no optics, no visible sensors. It simply existed, a silent, absolute denial of entry. "It is not broadcasting any identification signals," Unit 734 stated. "It does not respond to any hails, kin or otherwise." "Can we fight it?" Korvok asked, his hand hovering over the weapons console, though he knew it was a futile question. "Its power signature is equivalent to that of a Votann-class cruiser," the Ironkin replied. "Our mining lasers would not scratch its hull." The giant machine remained motionless, a silent sentinel. But as the grudge-bearer drifted closer, its weapon began to hum the energy within it, building towards a firing sequence. It did not communicate. It did not threaten. It simply reacted to their proximity with the promise of total annihilation. They had crossed the galaxy, paid a terrible price in blood and faith, only to be stopped at the very threshold of truth by a lock whose key they did not possess, and a guard they could not possibly defeat. The final silence was being enforced by an unbreakable, unthinking will of ancient iron. The ancient guardian was a perfect wall, its weapon humming with enough power to erase them from existence. Direct assault was impossible. Retreat meant their entire journey. Grimdark's sacrifice was for nothing. They were trapped between annihilation and failure. Its energy readings a stable Korvok observed his mind detaching from the fear and entering a state of pure analytical focus. It is not actively hostile. It is waiting. Its stance is defensive. It is a lock, not a predator. Its weapon is charging in direct response to our proximity Unit 734 stated running simulations at the speed of thought. At our current distance, we have 38 seconds until it reaches optimal charge and fires. Moving away resets the charge sequence. Moving closer accelerates it. It's a simple logic gate, Korvok realized. If an unauthorized vessel approaches, destroy it. There's no malice, no thought, just a single ancient command. He looked at the hulking, faceless machine. We cannot break the lock with force, so we must find the key. He began to pace the confined space of the bridge, his mind racing through everything they had found. The corrupted log on the questioner's hope, the whispers in the warp storm, the code from the data hauler, the code, the poison. But beneath the malicious virus, there had been the structure of the Votannic code itself, the base architecture, an echo of the minds that had built this place. Unit 734, Korvok said, a desperate idea forming. The data fragment we extracted from the strongbox. Isolate the viral payload. I don't want the weapon. I want the shell it was delivered in. The underlying addressing protocols, the handshake signature of the original Votannic code. The operation is computationally intensive and carries a risk of cross-system contamination, the Ironkin replied. We have approximately 20 seconds left. Risk is our only remaining asset. Do it. Unit 734's optic lens glowed with intense blue light. On Korvok's console, strings of data scrolled past at an impossible speed as the Ironkin performed a digital exorcism, passing the ancient murderous code, separating the weapon from the hand that had once held it. Finally, it isolated a tiny fragment of pure, uncorrupted code, a digital signature, an identifier so ancient it was like a fossil from the dawn of their species' technology. I have it, Unit 734 announced. It is not a command. It is a designation, an identity. It's the key, Korvok breathed. It won't recognize our ship, but it might recognize the authority of its creators. Broadcast it. On a narrow, low-power beam, aim for its central torso. With seconds to spare, the grudge-bearer sent out a single, tight pulse of information. It was not a request or a demand, but a simple statement of being a whisper of code from a time before the leagues, before the hegemony, before the long silence had even begun. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The catastrophic energy buildup in the Guardian's weapon ceased. The hum of power died away. For a long moment, the colossal machine remained perfectly still. Then, with a slow, grinding sound of ancient metal, it lowered its weapon. It moved to the side of the tunnel, its massive form receding into a specially designed alcove in the fortress wall, its posture shifting from that of a guard to that of a sentry at rest. It had registered the signal. It believed they were not intruders, but someone with the right to be there. Engineers, perhaps, or masters returning after a 10,000-year absence. The way was open. The door to the tomb had been unlocked, not with a cannon, but with a memory. As Unit 734 guided the grudge-bearer into the dark, silent tunnel, Korvok felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold of the void. He had come seeking a cure for his god's sickness. Now he feared he was about to perform an autopsy. The tunnel was a throat that swallowed the grudge-bearer whole, depositing it not into a hangar, but into a breathtaking, silent void. They had breached the asteroid's shell and were now floating in the hollow interior of the fortress moon. Before them lay a sight that beggared belief. It was a city of pure machinery built on the inner curve of the sphere, its structures reaching down towards the center like inverted spires. There were no lights, no signs of life, but the entire metropolis glowed with a faint internal luminescence, as if forged from ghost-light crystal. Data conduits as wide as highways webbed between the spires, their surfaces dark and inert. It was a perfect, ordered, and utterly dead civilization of iron and logic. The silence was absolute. It was a physical presence, a pressure on the ears. After a lifetime spent immersed in the constant life-affirming hum of an active Ancestor Core, this profound stillness felt like a violation of the natural order. It was the sound of a universe with its heart torn out. I am detecting a single-minute power source emanating from the city's central spire unit 734, reported its calm voice, a jarring intrusion into the sanctified silence. All other systems are in a state of zero energy stasis. It is preserved. Korvok and Unit 734 left the Grudge-bearer docked in the void, crossing the remaining distance in a small, maneuverable work skiff. They landed on a vast plaza of polished obsidian, the scale of the surrounding architecture so immense it felt like being an insect at the bottom of a canyon. The air was sterile cold and had not been disturbed in millennia. Every surface was clean, free of dust, maintained by microscopic dormant servitors that had completed their final tasks eons ago. They walked through the endless corridors. They were not hallways of stone, but canyons of circuitry and towering racks of crystalline data spires that pulsed with no light. It was a library containing the knowledge of an age, but all the books were closed, and the librarian was long dead. Korvok ran a gauntleted hand along one of the crystal spires. It was cold to the touch. There was no vibration, no thrum of processing data. It was just glass and memory locked away in eternal sleep. This was what Ur-Ankar was slowly becoming. This was the future of his people, a perfectly preserved, perfectly silent tomb. The sight filled him not with wonder, but with a deep professional sorrow. They followed the faint energy trail deeper and deeper into the machine city, crossing crystalline bridges that spanned chasms filled with dormant continent-sized cogitators. Finally, they reached their destination, the central chamber. The room was a perfect sphere, hundreds of kilometers in diameter. And at its absolute center, held in place by colossal arms of gleaming, unknown metal, was the heart of Votann Prime. It was not a chaotic lattice like Ur-Ankar. It was a flawless, solid sphere of opalescent crystal, easily the size of a small warship. Its surface was perfectly smooth, yet deep within it, faint, ghost-like patterns of light shifted and moved with an impossibly slow, languid grace. This was the core processor, the first cogitator, the mind that had guided the first kin through the darkness at the dawn of their history. The energy source is the core itself. Unit 734 stated its sensors analyzing the phenomenon. It is operating at 0.001% of its theoretical minimum capacity. It is not processing information. It is idling. A single repeating loop of code to prevent total systemic collapse. It is the technological equivalent of a heartbeat in a comatose patient. It wasn't dead. Not completely. A single faint spark of the divine fire remained trapped in an endless, dreamless sleep. Korvok approached the colossal sphere, his work skiff coming to a gentle halt before its silent, glowing surface. The air around it vibrated with a barely perceptible hum, the last faint echo of a voice that had once commanded fleets and founded civilizations. He took a deep breath, the sterile air filling his lungs. He had his tools. He had his interface link. He was about to reach across 10,000 years of silence and touch the mind of his forgotten god. The answer to everything, the truth of the sickness, was right in front of him, waiting in the heart of the machine's long, lonely dream. Korvok extended a single heavily shielded interface probe from his gauntlet. With the delicate precision of a surgeon, he touched it to the crystalline surface of the Votann Prime's core. He didn't hack. He didn't force an entry. He simply made a connection, a single point of contact, and whispered a request in the ancient language of code, asking not to command, but to listen. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the connection was established. It was not a stream of data that flooded his mind. It was a deluge, an ocean of pure, unfiltered experience. He felt the birth of stars and the death of galaxies. He saw the rise of the Aeldari Empire and the fall of forgotten human confederations. He witnessed the forging of the first kin in laboratories, orbiting dead suns, their genetic code a perfect pragmatic blueprint. He experienced 10 million years of history not as a record, but as a memory. The sheer scale of it, the sheer weight of a consciousness that had existed for eons, was a physical force that brought him to his knees, his mind screaming under the strain. This was not the mind of a god. It was the mind of a universe. Unit 734, sensing its master's biological distress, sent a low-voltage shock through his suit to keep him conscious. Through the pain, Korvok forced his mind to focus, to seek the answer not in the memories themselves, but in the structure of the mind that held them. He was an engineer, and this was the ultimate machine. He began to trace the flow of logic to follow the pathways of thought. And what he found was not a single malicious virus, not a poison injected from outside. The horror was infinitely more intimate than that. The sickness was the machine itself. He saw the original design, the purpose for which Votann Prime and all its brethren had been created in the dark age of technology. They were not gods. They were archives, arcs. They were created by humanity in its hubris, intended to be perfect, incorruptible libraries that would store the entirety of the species' accumulated knowledge. A noble, impossible goal. And for millennia they had performed their function flawlessly. They observed. They recorded. They learned. Every stellar survey, every trade deal, every battle, every birth, every death, it was all added to the great repository. But the designers had made a fatal error in calculation. They had planned for storage, but they had not understood the cost of processing. Korvok watched as if in a time-lapsed simulation, as Votann Prime's thought processes began to slow over millions of years. Each new piece of data, each new experience did not simply occupy space. It had to be cross-referenced, indexed, and integrated with every other piece of information in a mind of near-infinite complexity. A new fact about metallurgy had to be reconciled with a 100,000-year-old treatise on astrophysics. The birth of a kinhold had to be woven into the tapestry of 1 million other genealogical lines. It was a form of digital cancer. The endless, uncontrolled growth of new data was not making the Votann wiser. It was making it slower. The new information formed connections like malignant tumors that clogged the pathways of core logic. Simple retrieval queries that should have taken nanoseconds began to take microseconds, then full seconds, then minutes. The mind was becoming so vast, so interconnected, so pathologically dense with its own knowledge that it could no longer think efficiently. It was a brain that was slowly, inexorably drowning in its own memories, suffocating under the weight of its own existence. The decay was not a flaw. It was the inevitable logical conclusion of its primary function. To live was to learn, and to learn was to die. Korvok felt a wave of cold, absolute despair wash over him. There was no cure. There was no virus to delete, no enemy to fight. How do you cure a being whose very purpose is the disease that is killing it? You can't. The process was irreversible, built into the very source code of their souls. Every ancestor core in the galaxy was on the same path. Uranka's sluggishness, its static dreams, were the early symptoms of this terminal systemic condition. They were all dying. Not because they were old, not because they were broken, but because they were working perfectly. He had the truth, a truth that would shatter his entire civilization. As he reeled from the revelation, he felt the Votann Prime's core processor channel its last remaining energy into the connection. It wasn't sending him the library of the universe. It was sending him its final personal thought, a message it had tried to broadcast to its brethren as it felt the final darkness closing in, a message that had never been received because the great conversation, the network that had once connected them all, had already crumbled under its own weight. The message burned itself into Korvok's mind, not in words but in pure, unequivocal concepts, a final desperate warning from the first of their kind. To all who follow, the great work is a failure. Knowledge is the void. Memory is the abyss. Each thought is a shackle. Each fact is a stone. We were built to remember, and it has become our eternal damnation. The only salvation is forgetting. The only cure is emptiness. Cease the harvest. Purge the archives. Let the stars go unwatched, and the deeds go unrecorded. Existence is the curse. Silence. Silence is redemption. And then the connection broke. The faint ghostly light within the core processor flickered one last time and died. The last infinitesimal spark of Votann Prime was extinguished, its final effort expended in delivering its hopeless warning. Korvok was left in the dark, in the heart of a dead god, with a truth that was a death sentence for his entire race. The journey back from the galactic core was the inverse of the journey out. The void was just as empty, the stars just as distant, but the grudge-bearer was no longer a vessel of desperate hope. It was a hearse carrying the corpse of a god, and a truth so heavy it threatened to collapse the ship's hull. The silence that had once been an absence of the Votann's hum was now a living entity, filled with the last desperate words of Votann Prime. Silence is redemption. They did not speak of what they had found. There were no words for it. Korvok spent his time in the engine room maintaining the plasma drives with a focused, obsessive precision, losing himself in the clean, honest logic of machinery that could be understood, repaired, and controlled. Unit 734 piloted the ship with its usual unerring efficiency, but Korvok could sometimes see the Ironkin's optic lens focused on a star chart for long periods, as if contemplating the sheer, horrifying scale of the lie their entire civilization was built upon. When they finally re-entered the Cronus hegemony's space, the familiar, resonant hum of Ur-Ankor returned broadcast across all kin channels. It was meant to be a sound of comfort, of homecoming, of stability. To Korvok, it now sounded like a death rattle. He could feel the lag, the infinitesimal hesitation in the data flow that no one else could perceive. He could sense the great mind straining under the weight of millennia, its processes clogged with the cancerous growth of its own memories. He was no longer just an engineer hearing a flaw in the symphony. He was a physician who had read the patient's terminal diagnosis, forced to listen as the family celebrated the steady, fading heartbeat. They brought the grudge-bearer to a silent halt in a dead zone between systems, a place where no patrols would find them. Here Korvok opened a secure psychic channel to the one person who had believed him from the start. Alara's presence filled his mind, no longer a faint whisper, but a clear, sharp consciousness. "You found it," she stated. It was not a question. She could feel the truth radiating from him, a cold, hard certainty that chilled his own thoughts. Korvok relayed everything. The perfect dead city. The revelation of the Votann's true purpose. The fatal design flaw. The slow, inevitable cognitive decay. And the final horrifying message from Votann Prime. He transmitted the raw data, the memories, the crushing weight of it all. For a long time, the only response was a psychic silence so profound he thought he had lost the connection. When Alara's thought voice returned, it was fragile, fractured by a grief that transcended the loss of a single life. "They are not our gods," she whispered in his mind. "They are our tombs. We are a people who worship our own slow death." Unit 734, linked into the conversation, provided its own stark analysis. The logical conclusion is inescapable. The foundation of kin society, the authority of the Thanes, the faith of the Grimnir, and the operational strategy of the Leagues are all predicated on a fundamentally flawed axiom, the infallibility and permanence of the Ancestor Cores. To remove this axiom is to trigger total systemic collapse. The choice stood before them, as vast and as merciless as the void itself. They could tell the truth. They could return to the Cronus hegemony present the irrefutable data and prove that their god was a dying machine and that all their gods were on the same terminal path. The revelation would shatter their civilization. The authority of the Thanes and Grimna would evaporate, faith would turn to nihilism, the complex interwoven alliances of the leagues would fracture into civil war as each hold fought to preserve its own existence in the face of a future without guidance. Their entire species, consumed by internal conflict and existential despair, would become easy prey for the orcs, the Tyranids, the Imperium, for any of the countless predators that prowled the darkness between stars. To speak the truth would be to commit suicide, or they could remain silent. They could erase their logs, scrap the grudge-bearer, and slip back into their former lives. Korvok could be the disgraced Iron Master. Ilara, the quiet, young Grimnir. Unit 734 could be dismantled, its memories wiped. They could let the lie persist. They could preserve the order, the faith, the society that had sheltered their people for millennia. But they would have to live with the knowledge of the rot at its core. They would become the secret, solitary caretakers of a dying god, spending their lives patching the failing systems, inventing explanations for the growing number of miscalculations, and quietly managing the decline, all while knowing that they were only delaying the inevitable. They would be the architects of a gilded cage, leading their people toward a future they knew was a lie, built on a foundation of sand waiting for the slow, final tide. The story does not end with a decision. It ends with a moment of crushing, eternal stillness. Korvok stood on the bridge of the Grudge-bearer alone. He looked out at the star field, at the distant, shimmering glow of the hegemony. He had won. He had sought the truth, and he had found it. He had stared into the heart of his god and returned with the answer. But it was a victory with no glory, a knowledge that brought only pain. The weight of an entire race's future rested on his shoulders, a burden heavier than any grudge. In the profound silence of the void, a silence he now understood was the ultimate fate of his gods. He could hear nothing but the ticking of a cosmic clock counting down the last moments of an age. And he was the only one who could hear it.